Of the former USSR states, I'd say Russia is going to be the most important just because Russia is one of the more aggressive countries besides like China and North Korea. So that's always going to be a security threat. And then economically, Russia is a major exporter of oil and has a large influence over Europe's oil flow as well as natural gas, which the United States has very strong ties to Europe, so we're always going to be head up that way. And besides Russia, I'd say the Baltics are important due to their A, they're in the EU, and B, they're a great way to contain Russia itself, as they form the three of them form a sizable chunk of Russia's border with the rest of Europe. Belarus, I would say, isn't super important because at this point it's basically a Russian puppet state. Belarus will do whatever Russia wants it to do. They're not really going to be doing anything on their own. Ukraine, I'd say, is another important one along with the Baltics, due to A, its control over Crimea and therefore being able to, or its former control over Crimea, now Russia's control. So there's always going to be that. Ukraine is a spot of tension with Russia, which the United States can either support or not support in order to affect things with Russia. Moldova, I'd say, is another smaller one that isn't super important. You never hear about Moldova in the news aside from Bessarabia, and even then that's a small strip of Moldova that just wants to be independent because it's mostly ethnic Russians, courtesy of Stalin's policies of moving people around. Outside of Europe proper, the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan will always be important. Azerbaijan has large oil reserves and is, I believe, currently in a conflict with Armenia, which is going to be drawing U.S. interest. And then Georgia itself has always been a hotspot with Russia. So the United States, if it wanted to influence Russian affairs at all, could use Georgia as a means for that. Most of the stand countries, so Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all those, between most of them not being very rich or even resource rich and not being any major military powers, aren't extremely important. They could again be a buffer for Russia and just allies in Central Asia, but overall I would say none of the Central Asian countries are particularly important for U.S. security or economic policy.
All right. So outside of Russia, what would you say is the most important region? Like either the Baltics, the Stands, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, like those, out of all those regions of former USSR states, what would you say is the most important one?
I would say it'd be either the Baltics or the Caucasus. The Baltics, because if anything ever happened between them and Russia, that can risk dragging in the rest of the EU, because the EU does have a military protection clause, and by extension, NATO and the US. So if Russia wanted to start World War III, just invade the Baltics. The Caucasus are another one, though, just because of that oil and that connection between Russia and the Middle East. Azerbaijan's oil is going to be important to the world economy, and then Armenia just being the ethnic hotbed that it is, what with tensions with Turkey, now Azerbaijan, the Caucasus are always going to be at least somewhat relevant.
Okay. Cool.
Of all the regions, the Stands, the Balkans, and such, I would honestly argue that the Balkan region is the most important. The Balkans lead to great trade routes and shipping lanes into the Balkan Sea. Yes, Russia does have access there, but they can have more shipping lanes, more ports, and better access into the Balkan Sea. So the former Soviet Union countries like Ukraine, Georgia, areas of Poland, and Latvia, countries like Croatia, they are still important to the United States of America. This is because Russia has been flexing its arm for the past, I'd say, about 10 years now. They've been exhibiting that the problems of the past, the economic problems they faced the Soviet Union, the problems of their people starving and such, have gone away. At least that's what they're trying to say. And so they're stretching their arms and trying to say that they are still a superpower like they used to be. This has actually been demonstrated back, I believe it was 2014, when in the Ukraine they annexed a portion of the Ukraine that was Soviet Union. It was actually Russian, and they took it back. This led to a quasi-conflict between the Ukraine and Russia. More recently, Russia intervened in the Armenian conflict, which was leading to genocide. And this actually happened in 2020, right before Corona hit real bad. However, not much is known on what really happened. All we know is Russia stepped in and took in a police force role like America has been doing. Basically, Russia is becoming more powerful. And it is my fear that one day they will try to step up to America like they've done in the past. So those countries that were Soviet Union, they may want once more. If we don't give them resources, if we don't monitor them, if we basically don't do anything, they will become a Soviet Union of sorts again. And the Iron Curtain will fall once more, and that will lead to another, hopefully, Cold War, but temperatures are hot nowadays. And a lot of these countries don't want that. Latvia, especially, is always keeping their guns toward the east, so to speak, toward Russia, because they were taken over. They had no choice in the matter. However, in every country, there are those who remember the Soviet Union in a better light. Now, the Ukraine would be the biggest country to go up against Russia, but without American aid, without American intervention, none of those countries will stand a chance by themselves. Unfortunately, Eastern European countries can be extremely proud. In short, they need help, and that is the fear that of many, is that America will turn a blind eye, and America will say, "Well, we've already intervened too much. We're just going to let it happen," and that's what actually happened back in the 50s. We turned a blind eye. And what led was 30, 40 years of intense hatred to the people, and also a lot of starvation, a lot of crises, Chernobyl, events that could have been prevented had we actually been more wary, and had we prevented the takeover of the Eastern European nations. Of all the regions, the stands, the Balkans, and such, I would honestly argue that the Balkan region is the most important. The Balkans lead to great trade routes and shipping lanes into the Balkan Sea. Yes, Russia does have access there, but they can have more shipping lanes, more ports, and better access into the Balkan Sea.